Ladies and gents, from Lucy Reaction, and this is Classic Summarize Beowulf by the channel Only Sarcastic Productions. Beowulf, the tale of the baddest get to ever get. GEAT, what the hell does that mean? I don't know. So Beowulf, I think there was a movie called that long time ago, I don't remember it exactly, and there was also a game. I played that but didn't like it much. So I heard of that somewhat about Beowulf. I heard some stories, I guess. I think there was some Scandinavian type time hero or something. So yeah, why is it classic summarized and not, what is that, myth or something, what a miscellaneous myths or whatever? Because I'm pretty sure Beowulf has lots of magical stuff happening in that too. So why isn't this yeah. Only Sarcastic Pro is a great channel. I love reacting to this. I usually react to miscellaneous myths about Greeks and things, Odin and all those, that, Ragnarok, that type of myths too. I reacted to Loki video. That was the latest one. That was awesome. Clear a lot of things in my head. Changed my perspective to all that, Aesir and whatever, that thing. So yeah. This is about Beowulf. It's gonna be fun. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction I did. There's a link in the description. Check out the cast of the playlist like Oldest Sarcastic Production, Real Life Lore, Chris Gazard, CGP Grey, things like that, Internet Historian. And yeah, let's watch this one.
Beowulf was written a little over 1,000 years ago, and it's one of the oldest English texts that still exist. And that's English with big glowing air quotes, by the way, as it was written in Old English. Now, you might have Old English confused for that stuff Shakespeare wrote, all those forsooths and verilies and whatnot, but that's actually early modern English. Now, failing that, you might think that messy language Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales in must be Old English. That stuff you can kind of read, but it's all written with weird spellings and pronounced like you've got a golf ball in each cheek. Well, I'm afraid
Beowulf is Scandinavian, isn't he? I think Denmark, Sweden, something like that. Why is this in English?
that's only Middle English. No, if you want to know what real Old English was like, look no further than— oh, good lord, where do you start? One thing to note about Beowulf is that once you boil it down to its essential textual components, it's actually a remarkably short story, especially by epic poetry standards. This is because the style of writing at the time involved what amounted to drive-by exposition, where the narrator would, at random intervals, veer the story off course into a random tangent and explain huge, complex historical contexts to provide backstory for everything from a line of great kings to a small pile of gold. So when you cut out all that nonsense, you're left with a nice, simple story about how one man beat the crap out of 3 giant monsters, became the king of a small country, and inspired all the coolest parts of both J.R.R. Tolkien and Skyrim. This is good for me because—
seriously, Lord of the Rings is based on Beowulf? Damn. And yeah, Skyrim. I always thought Elder Scrolls and, Lord of the Rings has lots of similarities there in the story and lore and everything. So yeah, glad to see I'm not the only one.
In case you haven't noticed, I love to talk. And in between the simplicity of the story and the shortness of the text, there is plenty of time for me to ramble on about the idiosyncrasies of Beowulf without exceeding my arbitrary time limit. For instance, did you know Beowulf literally means bee-wolf, which itself was a colloquialism translating to bee hunter, which in turn just meant bear? Well, you do now. So our story begins with some backstory. Yeah, I know what I said, but this part is actually pretty cool, so roll with it. Once upon a time in ancient Denmark, there was a great king named Shield Shaving. He doesn't appear in this book, but Shield had a mighty son, Beowulf, who became an equally mighty king when Shield died. However, despite the name, this was a different Beowulf, who also does not appear in this book. Beowulf, still not that one, in turn had a son, Halfdana, who sparked a long-standing feud between his family and the Heathbards by getting himself killed by Froda, an ancient Danish king and lord of the Heathbards who also might have been his brother. And none of this appears in the book either. Isn't this fun? But Halfdana managed to have 4 kids before he died, although one of their names has been lost. The 3 kids we know about were Hrothgar, Halga, and Hrothgar. No relation. Now, among these kids, Hrothgar actually does appear in our story. Basically, he won some big war and got himself crowned king as a result, and decided to use his newfound wealth and power to build himself the ultimate party venue, a huge mead hall he named Heorot. There he and his thanes spent their days partying up a storm, and it is here that our story truly begins. But hey now, I hear you cry. I thought this story was supposed to be about Beowulf. I mean, it's his name on the cover. Apart from that fake-out guy with the same name 2 generations back, we haven't heard a thing about this Beowulf guy. What gives? Well, geez, you're pretty impatient, aren't you? I get your hopes up by telling you this story's gonna be short and this is how you behave? Shame on you. Besides, I wasn't finished. See, this story happened a long time ago, in that magical, poorly defined time.
Yeah, Beowulf must be a pretty common name if it just means bear. I mean, people are mighty warriors, he's like a bear, so name him Beowulf. I think it must be common name by then.
period in which it was widely accepted that ghoulies, ghosties, and long-leggedy beasties of all ages were just sort of roaming around causing trouble. And in Hrothgar's neck of the woods, the nastiest of these monsters was an ugly piece of work named Grendel. Grendel, we learn, is a big ugly giant descended from the original bad guy, the biblical Cain, and he lives in a grody swamp near a lake full of monsters, called, aptly enough, the Lake of Monsters. But the construction of this new mead hall starts disturbing his natural habitat, largely because the sounds of the 24-hour party circuit happening 10 feet from his house cause him to become just a touch crankier than usual. Now, Grendel has a Grinch complex
Denmark, so they must be using Bang & Olufsen's, speakers.
the size of East Texas, and when he hears the near-constant partying coming from Heorot, he gets a doozy of an idea of the terrible, awful variety. After all, the easiest way to stop the party is to kill everyone partying. Well,
I would do it.
You gotta give him points for efficiency. So that night, Grendel scoots on over to the mead hall, busts down the door, kills 30 of the Thanes, and skedaddles back on home. This violent party crashing becomes something of a nightly trend, which is disturbing for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the fact that a rampaging hellbeast murdering a bunch of their friends didn't kill the party atmosphere the first time it happened.
Seriously?
But we must not forget that these fine fellows
Yeah, I mean, they're like, oh, look at that, 30 dead bodies. Just, scrape them aside, I guess. Pick them up, drop outside. Just pile them up at the door, I guess. Okay, everybody else, come on in. Party again.
were Nords, one of the most famously testosterone-poisoned cultures in all of human history, so it should come as no surprise that it takes several more late-night murder trips from Grendel before Hrothgar considers calling on their buddies, the Yates, for a little bit of help. Either he got tired of losing his Thanes, or he got tired of replacing that stupid door every day. Either way, it's time to call in the cavalry. Enter the Storm Yates, led by Beowulf! See, I told you to get here. So, Beowulf, right? This guy is just the coolest. Hrothgar is...
Yeah, this never occurred to me, but yeah. Now, hearing all this, like, Hrothgar, Nords, obviously Scandinavians, whenever I play Skyrim next time, I'm gonna create a Nord character named Beowulf, because that makes so much sense. And then I'm gonna make him a Thane or something.
has known him since he was a kid, and since then Beowulf has made something of a name for himself doing some monster slaying. So Hrothgar asks what Beowulf's plan for dealing with Grendel is, and Beowulf is all like, well, I've been thinking. Grendel's not really a warrior, because he doesn't use weapons, right? Well, I think it's only fair if when we fight, I don't use any weapons either! And everyone's like, that's a great idea! But an impending fistfight with a terrifying murderous giant is no reason not to party. Actually, in Nordic cultures, it was specifically a reason to party. So they get down with their bad selves in the Heorot for a while, but one of the warriors is doubtful of Beowulf's abilities. So this guy, Unferth, is like, hey Beowulf, I heard you lost a week-long swimming contest to your buddy Brekka. Now how am I supposed to expect a loser like you to beat Grendel? And Beowulf is like, I'm afraid it's true. After swimming for a solid week in full plate armor, I'm afraid I can't say that I beat Brekka. But in my defense, I was slightly slowed down by the 9 sea monsters I killed along the way! Ooh! So night falls and Beowulf prepares himself for the upcoming battle by dumping all of his armor and weapons and waiting in the Heorot for Grendel to come a-stomping by. And soon enough, Grendel busts down the door and encounters Beowulf. So they beat the ever-loving crap out of each other for a while and tear up the Heorot like crazy, and Beowulf wins by ripping off Grendel's arm with his bare hands. Ha! He's been disarmed! So Grendel flips out and runs back to the lake to bleed out in peace. Beowulf gives Grendel's arm to Hrothgar to hang from the Heorot's rafters, and
So, Beowulf is just a human, and the other guy is a giant. And Beowulf supposedly ripped his arm off. What, does he have superpower or something? I thought he was just a warrior.
Having completed the Kill Grendel quest, King Hrothgar showers Beowulf with rewards, gives him access to his halls and gear, and probably also lets him buy a house in Whiterun. Unferth, that guy from earlier, apologizes for doubting Beowulf's abilities and gives him an heirloom sword named Hrunting as an apology present. They all start fixing up the Heorot, then use their newly repaired mead hall to get blackout drunk. Life is good. Until Grendel's mother storms into the hall, murders Hrothgar's trusted advisor, grabs Grendel's arm, and vanishes into the night. So Hrothgar sends Beowulf to track down Grendel's mother and avenge the murdered Thane, Ashera for those of you who care, and Beowulf starts hunting her down. They track her through a variety of cartoonishly evil locations and end up at the Lake of Monsters, where they find Ashera's head along with a veritable menagerie of sea monsters. Beowulf prepares for battle by putting on his heavy armor and cannonballing into the lake to confront Grendel's mother, who lives at the bottom. For those of you concerned with his well-being, don't worry too much. Beowulf's lungs are the size of train cars, and the solid day it takes for him to hit lake bottom does little more than bore him. But his boredom is soon over, since as soon as he gets close to the bottom, Grendel's mother ambushes him and drags him into her cave, which is actually a pretty nice locale. Anyway, they do glorious battle, but Beowulf's sword Hrunting utterly fails to hurt her in any way, so he resorts to his tried and true method of using sick nasty wrestling maneuvers. Unfortunately, Grendel's mother finds this effort utterly unimpressive and just starts trying to stab him a whole bunch. But luckily for Beowulf, Grendel's mother has a bit of a hoarding problem, and her cave is absolutely full of nifty magical weaponry. So he grabs a shiny looking sword that turns out to be super magical and manages to kill her with it. Then, after some searching, he finds Grendel's corpse and decapitates it to bring his head back as a present for Hrothgar. Funny story about that. that, as it turns out, both Grendel and Grendel's mother were totally immune to mortal weapons, but that sword Beowulf grabbed had been forged by giants and was thus capable.
Wait a minute. If they don't get hurt by the normal weapons, how did Beowulf kill that giant? I mean, yeah, he ripped his arm off, right? I mean, if you use your hands, that's not really a weapon. So normal swords and things cannot hurt them, but a Beowulf can literally rip the giant's arm off. Huh, that makes sense.
Of hurting them. Why Grendel's mother kept the one thing capable of killing her within arm's reach is probably the subject of much scholarly debate. Unfortunately, this kick-ass magical sword appears to have been one use only.
Well, in this story, the sword has to be there. You can't just say, like in the video game, like, oh, look at that. In order to proceed, you need to complete another objective. The objective is, another part of the map. So you have to fast travel there now, find the sword and come back and then kill her. That's a bit too much detail in the book.
Since after Beowulf uses it to decapitate Grendel, the blade straight up dissolves. So Beowulf swims back to the surface with Grendel's head and the sword's hilt, both of which he gives to Hrothgar. He's showered with gifts again, partying happens, etc., etc. Then Beowulf and the Yeats, having done all the monster slaying they felt obligated to do, sail back to their homeland, where Beowulf presents their king Hygelac with a bunch of treasure and is lauded as a great hero. As thanks, King Hygelac gives him a fancy sword, a bunch of land, and a really nice house. My god, this is Skyrim. But before we go any farther, let's talk about that one-use-only sword, because it's actually...
This is so Skyrim. The Beowulf is so Dovahkiin. He hunts dragons and things, all the monsters, single-handedly kills all of them. Nothing else them. He gets showered in the basically gold and everything. He gets praise everywhere.
Actually really interesting. So first of all, the hilt is carved with vaguely biblical scenes about how the giants were wiped out by the Great Flood in an effort by God to wipe out all evil. The hilt is also covered in Norse runes, implied to be some kind of magic, which is interesting because traditionally pagan magic and Christianity didn't exactly get along. And the other cool thing about this sword is that it was described as damascened, that is, having been put through the process to create Damascus steel. Now, for those of you who don't know, Damascus steel is a legendarily tough metal whose forging process has been lost, which has endlessly frustrated modern metallurgists since there are a ton of Damascus steel blades lying around, and you'd think we'd be able to reverse engineer something.
Seriously, I'm still surprised by that. We can't figure that out. How is that possible?
But no, every time we try, we just keep finding weirder and weirder things about Damascus steel that makes us want to know how to make it even more. For instance, not only do the blades look super cool and magic, kind of like liquid metal, they've actually been shown to contain carbon nanotubes. Carbon goddamn nanotubes. How does that even happen? But anyway, back to Beowulf. So
this tells us that, the past, obviously compared to today, they were primitive, but the people from the past were not as primitive as we think, because lots of knowledge is lost and we don't know how primitive they were. Maybe in a normal sense of the way that we think of, they were primitive, but certain knowledge they had were really advanced. I don't know, because we still can't figure that out. We built particle accelerator, we found Higgs boson, and God knows what, we are advancing in quantum mechanics and everything, but we can't figure that out. This is something weird, man.
King Hygelac and his next of kin go the way of all badasses, and Beowulf finds himself crowned king of the Yeats, who he manages to rule without incident for a solid 50 years. That is, until some rando manages to piss off a dragon.
It's not Skyrim. In Skyrim, it doesn't matter what we do, we never become a king.
By stealing a cup from its hoard. And hey, guess what? Beowulf has another monster to fight. For background, the dragon had been chilling for the past god knows how long in a barrow full of gold. The barrow was a burial mound for a troop of warriors from some ancient and noble race, and it had been filled to bursting with fancy treasure. The dragon lived there undisturbed until some tricksy hobbit snuck in and stole his favorite teacup or something. The dragon objects to this rather strenuously and decides to hunt down the thief the old-fashioned.
This is plot of Hobbit, man. Lord of the Rings stories directly taken from Beowulf.
Way by burning everything in sight on the principle that he's got to hit the criminal eventually. And hey, if this is reminding you of anything...
There you go. Smog.
Yeah, that isn't a coincidence. Tolkien was a fan of the classics, but the dragon pisses off the wrong Yeet when he torches Beowulf's house, so Beowulf does his thing and decides to challenge the dragon to single combat. So Beowulf and his 12 backup dancers go track down the dragon, bringing with them both the thief and the stolen shiny thing. Now, you might think that using weapons to kill a 100-foot fire-breathing hellspawn could be considered poor sportsmanship, but Beowulf acknowledges that trying to barehanded wrestle a goddamn dragon might not end well for him. So he brings that fancy sword Hygelac gave him. It's called Nailing, it's an heirloom, and it's shiny as hell. But that doesn't matter for very long since it snaps in half 3 seconds into the fight. God,
He's so Dragon Ball, isn't it? Going with a sword to kill a dragon. The sword is enchanted.
They go through swords like coffee filters around here. So the majority of Beowulf's posse bails and skedaddles into the woods, all except for one, a bloke named Beowulf, one of Beowulf's kinsmen, who couldn't stand idly by and watch Beowulf be mildly inconvenienced by a tidal wave of hellfire. So Beowulf rushes to Beowulf's aid just in time for the dragon to get in a lucky hit and bite Beowulf clean through the neck. Now, you might think this would be a problem for Beowulf. Only if you haven't been paying any attention, of course. Nah, Beowulf uses this opportunity to go for his dagger, while Beowulf manages to find a soft spot in the dragon's armor and gets in a hit. Whereupon, Beowulf finishes the job with his trusty knife. So now the battle is over, you'd think Beowulf would start succumbing to that gaping neck wound of his, right? Nah, he's too cool to succumb to a little thing like massive blood loss. On the other hand, deadly dragon poison could certainly pose a problem. So Beowulf's actually dying, and he's like, Beowulf, come closer. I have one last request. Could you go drag the treasure out of the barrow so I can take one last look at the riches I just won? Yeah. So Beowulf zips into the barrow, comes back out with an armload of the shiniest of the treasure, and Beowulf is like, thanks, kid, have fun being the next king, and dies. So Beowulf, now King Beowulf, exiles the 11 dudes who ran away from the dragon, and the Yeats retrieve the rest of the dragon's treasure and hold Beowulf's funeral. Then they set up a kick-ass barrow for Beowulf, reburying the dragon's treasure in with him, where, according to the text, it remains to this day. Don't get your hopes up, though. Some dragon probably already called dibs.
Yeah. Oh my god, why did you have to write that? For another parallel note, the total number of people who went to the dragon's lair. 13 seats and 1 thief. Geats. Okay. This is already hard to read. 13 Geats and 1 thief. Not to mention the king among them ended up dead. So really, the Hobbit is basically just Beowulf as told by the thief. Yeah, okay. Write your S about that. Yeah. I had no idea, the Hobbit story is directly taken from Beowulf. That is something. Beowulf is so influential, I had no idea about that. I thought it was just going to be one of the, I guess, old mythical stories or something like that. Apparently, look at that. Tolkien basically take inspiration from that and even took the whole story. Alright people, that was Beowulf by All Sarcastic Production. If you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast playlist, check out the end cards, and I'll see you next time.